Now. All right.
All right.
Hello. Welcome to the Slay Spire interview with the lead developer, Anthony Giovannetti. Did I pronounce that right?
You did a pretty good job there. Yeah, Giovannetti.
Sweet. So this interview is about the development process of Slay the Spire so that we can understand what it's like to be a developer. How do you feel about this, Anthony?
Sounds great. Let's do it.
All right. So here's the first question. What is your background in game development? For example, school and college classes you took, hobbies, and games you made before Slay the Spire.
Sure. So when I started out as a computer science student in college, and that's where I met Casey for the first time, and we just had the idea in our head to do like hobbyist level game development. So we started out. We actually worked on a Flash game, and we put it out on sites like Congregate and stuff like that. We spent actually like an entire summer working on it, and it was this bullet hell game like Ikaruga, and we learned a lot doing that. It was this huge learning experience because like we tested it a bunch ourselves, but the game was just ridiculously too hard for like the casual Flash audience. And then after that, we made a little iPhone like infinite runner game, and then later on we finished college, and then we went out into the software industry. Just worked in the software industry for a while, and then eventually met up again and decided to do game development full time. Quit our jobs and then founded MegaCrit. Um, in college, I took like a couple game design classes whenever I could, but there was only like a handful, so that was like the extent of what I actually took in school. It was just like I think 2 or 3 classes tops. So.
All right. So the next question, you kind of answered a bit of it, but it kind of expands on the transition. What was your occupation/schedule before Slay the Spire was conceptualized, and how much did working on the game alter your life?
Oh yeah, okay, sure. So right before we did Mega Crit, we were both in the software industry, and it was when I say software industry specifically, we were doing QA as well. So like we were SDETs, so we had like a QA focused perspective on software. So we were always looking at bugs, testing, things like that. And then before that, I actually managed a board card game store. So, I'd be running Magic tournaments every week. I taught all kinds of different deck builders to people, played like everything. And that definitely shaped things for Slay the Spire. But, and then when we started Mega Crit and we were actually just developing the game, it did like drastically change our lives because all of a sudden, instead of like working in a corporation, you're on your own, kind of going to your own beat. Like you're forced to be self-motivated, and when you get up in the morning, you just have to be able to sit down and work and not get distracted and like just play other random video games or watch Netflix or something. So it was definitely a big like lifestyle change, but once you get into the rhythm of it, at least for us, it wasn't a big deal to like stick to it.
All right. The third question, what work was involved in the prototype/alpha stage of the game, and how did you establish and expand foundations of the game? For example, like all the cards you made and how this card system works, all the mechanics, basically, how you like stuck with it.
Sure. So I think actually we had several different prototype versions. Like the very first thing that I did was I kind of had this rough game design document where I would hash out a couple of ideas. I put like various games that I wanted to like combine together, and I thought it would be cool. And I had like this simple document that I showed Casey, and I had taken like Magic set editor and I had made some custom little prototype cards and printed them out into like a very basic starter deck with like strikes and defense. And then a couple basic cards. Although at the time, like the characters I had was like warrior, rogue, wizard, and the the energy system was a bit more placeholder. Like originally, uh, the warrior had like two red energy and one green energy, and I was thinking, oh, maybe you'll be able to like multi-class different cards and stuff. And we ended up getting rid of all that because it didn't work very good. But that was like the very initial prototype. It was just a handful of cards printed out that I would like physically run through. And then Casey made the very initial prototype where he had a very simple system, and that's where you might have seen it posted to the internet before, but that was, we called it Hat Man. We had like a little stick figure, a guy with a hat, and he was running through these little dungeons. And there was no map system. It was just like at the end of a fight, you would click on a room and you'd go to there were like three doors, and you'd click on a door and you'd go to the next room. And there were just, I think, definitely less than 10 enemies in the game, like just one boss. You just went through a couple rooms, fought a boss, and then that was like the end of it. And then we actually went and we like tested that prototype at some of the local Seattle indie scene stuff. And then we just kind of started iterating from there, like adding layers of complexity as we went. And as we kept going, we first started out like getting our like really close friends to try early versions of it, and maybe we'd have them record it and then like send us the recordings so we could see what they did. And then we just started to like build out until we had an internal playtesting group that was like testing just Act 1 because that was all we had at the time. And then then we went to Act 2, and we actually just had 2 acts for like a long time, and we did a lot of internal playtesting, and it was like just the Ironclad and just 2 acts with the content. And we were refining our systems and building off of that. And from there, we just kind of kept iterating, and we were releasing like daily updates to our internal playtester friends. And we found that people were really liking that. And that's kind of what influenced us to be really aggressive with changes going into the game later. And yeah, we just kept slowly building out our playtest group and adding more and more people. That's basically how we kept our prototype process going. So
I'm gonna expand a bit on that. So in other
mhm.
interviews, it was either you or Casey who referenced that you were using Slack to collaborate. And what made you want to use Slack, and how helpful was it?
So I think we used Slack because we had used Slack like in the software industry, and it felt like something that was just a good way to chat with everyone, keep everything all in one place, and we could keep things private. So it was like invite only. We would give people like an NDA, they'd fill it out, and then we'd send them an invite to our playtester Slack. And it was a really good way at first of just keeping everything in one place where we could talk to our playtesters and then give them builds. And then one of our playtesters made the very first version of our feedback bot for us because he just like fell in love with the game. And that was like insanely productive for us because once that was implemented, then all of a sudden everything that any playtester was doing, they could just hop on, file a bug, and we could get it. And that's why we ended up adding it to the Discord too. And that's I Like Shiny. He's the guy who runs the bots. So but yeah, Slack was huge for us. So I really recommend like Slack or Discord or something, some way for people to automate your feedback that you can get from people. Because like beforehand, when I had done I've been involved in other friends like physical board game stuff, and they'll give you like a survey at the end, and you can fill it out, but that's really like a very slow method of learning information about your game. It's still really valuable, and you should do it if you can, but we were just trying to like scale it and streamline it as much as possible. So
Mm-hmm. That's a good expansion. All right, number 4. How did you determine who to ask for commission? Oh, right. How did you determine who to ask to commission certain assets of the game? For example, the soundtrack and additional art assets you needed.
sure, so that's actually a tricky one because um, game design skills are not necessarily correlated with like finding and hiring people. So we we initially went to like our local Seattle indie scene to find some people, and that's where we met Bruce, our background artist. He was at the very first play test where we showed like our little Hat Man build to people, and he kind of just showed up and was there, and we just chatted with him, and he gave us his card, and we ended up contacting him later on, and he did a good job. But for other people, what we did was we would actually post to, I'm trying to remember the name of the subreddit. I think it's like Game Dev Classifieds on Reddit. And we say, hey, we're looking for people. This is a paid position, which is good because, you know, a lot of people just offer like, oh, we'll get royalties, and, you know, hopefully we'll make some money and you'll get paid. But that's not nearly as enticing. So we said, hey, this is a paid position. Email us your profile. And then we like vetted people through that. And we got really lucky. We found some really cool people to work with. So, and then we just kind of hit it off from there.
All right. Here's the fifth question. How did Slay the Spire gain publicity, and were there any noticeable features of the game you created or steps you took to do this?
Sure. So we actually spent, I say this a lot, but basically our marketing budget was $0. We spent just the bare minimum. It was like $100 to get on key mailers. Keymailer is a thing for game developers where they can send out keys to streamers. And so we signed up for Keymailer's service where we could like search for streamers. And what we could do is we could say, okay, let's look for a streamer that's like played Hearthstone and a roguelike game. Like maybe they played Hearthstone and Spelunky. And we can enter in that into a search, and it'll pull up all the streamers that have done that in their database, and we can like sort them by, you know, their various numbers, how often they stream, stuff like that. And we would just send out keys to streamers. And the idea was that we think our game is really streamable. We've kind of developed it with streaming in mind. We don't have a marketing budget. We're going to try to hit it off with streamers and hope that like that's going to be our in. And that's basically what happened, where initially how we saw our first big success, because after like our first 2 weeks, which is where most indies make most of their money, we didn't really do very much. But after that, we kind of a random Chinese streamer picked up the game and got like a video with over 1 million views or something, and all of a sudden we blew up in China. And so we started scrambling to like localize our game. And then once that happened and, you know, China started to pick it up, we were starting to steamroll, and like it's like building a snowball. As you get more and more attention, it just builds on itself and other streamers start picking it up. And then because we are very streamable, it works with the streamer's audience, and then the streamers are likely to keep playing it. So like different games have different advantages, and they also have different strengths for streamers. So like you can be a streamer and you can play our game for hundreds or thousands of hours, right? And that's a big advantage over like if we were a little narrative game and you played it and you were done in 5 hours, and you know you're not getting as much benefit out of the streamer playing it. So we kind of like really blew up off of that, and then we just kept going, kept pushing out our weekly updates, and then because we were doing constant weekly updates, people always had stuff to come back to. People on Steam would see that, you know, their friends keep playing this game, they keep trying it, and then so it was mostly like word of mouth and streamers. That was how we did it, and it's you know, I don't know how replicatable that is for other people. It's very like game dependent, and it's not always like it's not a sure path to success. So, but for us, it's what we did and it's what worked.
So I'll have a little follow-up on that, and it's about the Twitch integration feature. What would you say that was the inspiration of why you put this Twitch integration so that there would be audience interaction?
Well, we so I believe it's been a while now, but I believe actually it was someone in the modding community or one of the community members. I think he's credited in game. Made the initial version of it because he just thought it would be a good idea. And then we saw it, loved it, and we contacted him and then kind of incorporated it into the game. And I always thought when we were developing Spire, like, oh, it'd be really cool if there's all these different community things. It'd be great if there's like, database sites or things like Spire logs and stuff like that. So I always wanted to support things like that. But I think in general, it's often good to like let the community lead with those kind of initiatives. So this was actually done by an individual first who kind of spearheaded it.
So you kind of just felt like you got lucky with someone who wanted to incorporate it.
Yeah, and we would have eventually done something like that if somebody didn't step forward. But because, man, I wish I remember his name now.
I think it's Chrono. It started with that. Was it?
No, it was like, well, I'll think of it later, and I'll write it in the
All right.
but it's something that I don't know if we would have done exactly the same, but it's something we would like. We had plans for various kinds of church integration at some point, because you can look at like Hearthstone streams and they have good support, but the whole pick one thing, that it just kind of came from the community. So
All right. So the sixth question, you might be going back a bit in time, but when did you feel it
sure.
was appropriate to release the early access of the game?
So early access was released after we had been working on it for 2.5 years, and kind of our thought process for it is that as consumers ourselves, we don't like it when an early access game is released and it feels just like super incomplete and not ready. So we didn't want to release the game until we were comfortable that it was already really fun to play at that moment. So like it was already, you know, what I would consider a
There's
a
a
pretty
yeah,
good standalone product.
there's a
And
game, and then you can expand on it.
yeah, and so for example, like, the Ironclad and the Silent were done at that point. Now obviously we ended up still doing a lot of balance stuff during early access, but basically we were thinking we'll mostly do balance and content at that point. And that's, I think, where you want to be. And that was like our thought process is we don't want to release a game and it feels just like a mess. There's like, you know, we want to have a clear like content roadmap that we can show people, and then that feels good because then they'll get constant content updates. But it's not good if you release a game and it just feels kind of like an incomplete, rushed out mess, or like they're just doing it, the devs are just doing it to get funding, right? Because they ran out of money. And I think that's where a lot of early access games get bad rep, because there are a lot of early access games where it's like, okay, it's kind of this unfinished, like this really unfinished product, and you're like not even sure if the devs are going to keep it going, and that's when it feels bad for the end user. So
That's
um,
where you got the idea of these weekly updates as well, right? Because that tells the players everything is changing and being updated, so there's more confidence that the game is still being fleshed out.
yeah, so that was one of the components. So it's like, one thing was we always try to like put ourselves in the minds of the end user. So it's like, what do I like as a user when I'm playing, a game that's getting updates, like an early access game? Well, I really like when I can actually constantly come back and see changes, and that there's new content, new things to do. That feels great. We could see, and then we also could see that with our play testers, that hey, we're keeping, just friends play testing this silly game we're working on at the time, that we had no idea how successful it would be. And part of why they keep coming back like day after day playing this super early game is because they can keep seeing all of these changes, and like a lot of changes just constantly. And that feels really good when you feel like everything's always getting updated and improved. So we knew that that was a feel good feeling, and we wanted to give that to our customers.
All right. So number seven kind of spans over the whole timeline. What would you consider was the hardest part of development during each stage of the game? So I'm going to focus on three parts: the alpha, the beta, and release.
Okay. So it's a bit tough to tell the strictly hardest. However, I will say the alpha actually went pretty smooth. in general. Like we thought that we were onto something. Like all of our playtesters were coming back and saying they really loved it. They were playing for really like a lot of time. They were like doing their own things. So like pretty much all of the initial playtest art that we started with that eventually influenced the playtester art mode. That was just because I think it was like 2 or 3 of our internal playtesters just started making their own joke art for stuff because they wanted to see art on the cards. Like when you have people who are doing stuff like that for your game, like that is a really good sign that you have something compelling. So our alpha was actually really encouraging overall. Though I mean, the hardest part was that we were just working a lot and like really pouring ourselves into it. But we never like hit a single like roadblock, and we were like, oh no, like how are we gonna do this? And there was a movie moment where we like got over the hump of something. Like it was really day to day a lot of hard work, and we just kind of got through it. What was hard was actually like launching the game and dealing with all of that, all of the promotional stuff for that ended up like a lot of it just ended up not mattering, trying to manage all the social media things and being good at that. That was a lot of stress. The actual launch was very stressful, especially in those first few weeks when we're like, oh no, we're not doing very well, things like that. So that was really tough. Within the early access, working on, I don't know that there was something that was necessarily the hardest. Working on the defect was definitely one of the more impactful things, and like we spent a lot of time on it. But I think it ended up pretty well, and it just went into our regular workflow. Like part of our perspective is that it's all about just getting into the right workflow and things. So you just get into a natural work state where just every day you get up and you just sit down and you start working. And as long as you have like a clear path and a clear vision for where you're going, you can get through it. So I don't think we ever really had like just a single thing that was like this big thorn in our side.
Finally, like post-release, like after V 1.0 was out, anything in particular that you thought was
Yeah,
different?
sure. So post release, I will say that the porting stuff has probably been the biggest issue post release. Just because porting adds a whole bunch of other like when it's just on the PC and it's like early access, it's just us uploading builds to Steam, right? There's no like other agents that we need to work with. It's just if we want to do something, we can fix it and turn it around and push it out. And so you can have a really good workflow. For porting, you have to deal with you have to deal with the publisher, you have to deal with the actual console itself. And so there's all these other layers in between that you have to interface with. And learning how to with all of that has been a real thing for us. And we've learned a lot from it. But that has definitely post-release was the thing that was the hardest to work with, I'd say.
All right. All right. So number 8, how do you feel about the dynamics of a 3? Well, you were formerly 2, but
Mm-hmm.
3-person team. What do you think would have gone differently with more people involved?
So I think our small size is a huge advantage. We didn't need to have like daily stand-ups and big like dashboards to try to organize what we're working on. We had a fairly simple workflow. We were always talking to each other every day over like Skype, or I think it started with Skype a lot and then moved to Discord and things like that. And so because we had such strong communication, we were always in like a similar mental state. We could work really, really fast. And that was a big advantage. The big thing is you lose out on, the ability to have a ton of people and get scale and mainly we could have a lot of artists working on things simultaneously and in parallel. But at the same time, we're able to just adapt and change really quickly and be on the same page. So I actually really, really like our small size. I think it was kind of one of our strengths for the process. There's no conflicted design vision or anything like that. So we really liked it. And I don't think we want to grow into a big studio or something that a lot of indies do, where they'll release a game and then they'll grow really big and then struggle. I think one of our strengths is our small size. I could see growing a little bit, but we definitely want to stay small and lean.
Okay, so about that, you also mentioned that in your credits page, or your about page actually, you also have collaborators, and then now that it's post-release and that the community branch exists, you also have people involved to improve the game. So how do you feel about that?
Yeah, so I've I think I've enjoyed that overall. It's been part of us wanting to really like just extend modability and the ability for the community to still do things, as we like um so that when we do start working on our next title, people can still have new content and things this through the modding community. And we've really appreciated the help from the modders like yourself who have pushed things, into that branch to improve that process. So I think that's gone really well. And similarly, I think our community translations have killed it. It lets us just adapt so fast instead of having to wait for large turnaround times. As instead of like having to reach out to a localization company, spend like wait several weeks, and then get back translations that maybe even aren't very good. Instead, we get like actual native speakers who understand the game and really know what they're doing. And I think people have generally really liked that. So in general, I'm really big on community and developers working together. I think that's a good strength that indies have, is that you can just like build a closer connection to your community,
I
right?
see
So
that.
like, yeah, like even with something like Reddit, I can pop in and say, oh hey, sorry about that bug, we'll fix it. That feels good. And I think it's refreshing to see, instead of like having a PR person go in and tell you that actually the microtransaction to get the character is a good thing because you feel accomplished, right? So um, people just appreciate that relationship that you can develop more.
I would definitely agree with that because just the ability for the developer himself or herself to respond directly and in a shorter time gives more confidence to the audience, and there's a stronger bond between the community and then the developers. So number 9, which is the last one I have before we get to community questions, is what are your plans after you feel Slay the Spire is finished in development?
Sorry, say that one more time.
What are your plans after you feel Slay the Spire is finished in development?
Yeah. So what's next after? So after development, we will probably start working on our next title. We definitely are not done making games. We want to make more. We don't quite know what our next game will be, but what we're going to do is we're going to do a lot of prototyping again and find what we want to work on next, something that we think is just as sticky, just as good, and then we'll be working on our next game and hopefully making games for a long time to come. So
All right, so that is all of my questions. It ended up in about 30 minutes, which is pretty good. So I'll let the community ask anything that they feel I missed on and could be expanded or anything, and I'll pull anything I think is good.
cool. All right, cool. There's a lot of questions in this channel.
You can also answer anything you would like to answer as well.
Sure, I'll answer this one real quick while you're looking for ones. So, what happened to Crowbot? So, just for anyone who doesn't know, Crowbot is what was going to be the third character initially, and we thought it was we had this idea for this little like cultist imitated crow creature that was like a little mechanical contraption, and it was going to have kind of a mana system where it would like gain a resource and spend it to play cards. And then we tested it out because we whenever we make new characters, we test out the concepts, and we just found it wasn't that interesting, so we just scrapped it and then we moved on to the defect. Although we didn't immediately move to the defect. We went from Crowbot to a gunner character who would load ammo into your barrels, and then you'd like fire off your gun, and then that system kind of morphed into the orb system that the defect has. So the Crowbot just was like one of many designs throughout Slay the Spire that just got scrapped during development.
So, to expand on that, in one of your previous interviews, you emphasized the importance of iterating through concepts to see if something works, and that reminds me of the daily system.
Oh yeah, the daily system. Yeah, so the daily is another example of that, where like um, all our initial thoughts with the dailies was we will we'll have a daily like Spelunky or something else. So we'll have a really difficult, challenge, and then everyone can compete. And then I implemented it, threw it up for one of the weekly updates, and then we immediately started getting feedback. And basically, no one was really liking it. They thought it was too hard. They didn't really understand why they just needed another hard thing. And so we thought, okay, well, I like the idea of these modifiers that we have. What if we just focus on making them the interesting ones that people like, and we'll transform the dailies into that. And then, like, the very next weekly update, we changed it. We did a super quick turnaround, and immediately people really liked the dailies. And then we just kind of kept going on that, and the dailies turned from something really unpopular to, within like a week or two, turned into something very popular, where now a lot of people will, like, when they play Slay the Spire and they're not like, Ascension 20 grinders, a lot of people just get up and they just play like one daily run a day because they like to just see the weird stuff that happens. So we kind of made a new mode that actually caters to even a different like subsection of our audience. So it was great. So again, that's just like staying agile and being able to move quick. So
Ooh, this one's a little similar to about iterating. So, someone asked, how has having public betas affected designing characters, and how did character designs change from conception to release?
sure. So the public beta process is definitely a bit different than like when we for like Ironclad and Silent, where we just had internal play testing. Um, Although we still like, so for the Defect and the Watcher, we still did run them through our internal playtesters before taking them into the public playtest. So we still do take everything through that an internal step. It's just shorter. Um, the public playtest process it's very good at like quickly finding out bugs and obvious balance things much faster than internal playtesting can. Right? I mean, just the number of eyeballs is much higher. The biggest downside to it is that at the same time, like, if someone's unhappy with something in the beta process, they might like just play on the beta branch, and that's like their game to them. So you need to like walk a fine line to where you can't always be quite as experimental. Although that said, it just depends on how you are able to react to it. So for example, with the dailies, right? It's fine if like a week later you change it. It's just, if things are taking maybe months to change, that can cause discontent. So but overall, I actually really like the main branch and the beta branch system that we have going, especially like during early access. It was cool to be able to say, yes, we're an early access game, but also we have a beta branch where it's, if you even want to be even more on the bleeding edge, and things are going to break, and as long as you're okay with that, this is for you. Go try it out. Give us feedback. So that was, I think it's been just super useful overall, and like for the people that want it, they really like it.
I'm searching for any other questions that may have been unanswered in some sort of flavor. I guess I have my own. So this
Sure.
relates to the early part of the game development, which is what resources did you use for actually creating the game? For example, the prototypes,
Sure. So
early foundations.
yeah. So like I said, so the initial one was just like paper. But after that, everything else, like all the prototypes and the game itself, has all been done in libgdx, which is this Java library thing built on the lightweight Java game library. But it's kind of like what Minecraft used. We used it because we knew that we always wanted to be on mobile, and since it was Java, we could go to mobile easier. Um, and then also we were familiar with it, and we could like just move quickly with it. Uh, it has its flaws. Like it's definitely a pro con kind of thing. There are lots of issues we've had because we use libgdx, and there's been advantages. The main one is it let us move quickly. But if our next game will be in libgdx, I'd say probably not. So I don't necessarily recommend it to people unless you like are familiar, at the very least, like really familiar with Java and want to code in Java or something.
All right, there's an interesting question recently. How much has public interaction affected the design strategy for new content compared to the closed testing atmosphere?
It's definitely different. So I mean, whenever you're
sorry.
go ahead.
Because before you mentioned that you would have feedback bot to for your friends who were testing it, and you had Slack to organize it, and you said something about like surveys, like they had limited use, and then here,
Yeah.
right now, we still have feedback bot in a way called Spire bot, and that's where everyone enters their feedback, bugs, stuff like that. Except with the, I guess, different numbers, and how some feedback may not be as good and some are actually pretty good. I'm sure the dynamics change. All right.
Yeah, I mean, again, so it's mainly like a scale thing, right? So, like, because even with its internal playtesters, you get a lot of bad feedback and you get good feedback. I mean, feedback's always all over the place, and you have to like filter through it to find the good stuff. The big difference is just that you get a lot more of it, so you're going to be able to see a lot more good and the bad, and it can take a lot of time to go through things. So that's one of the big aspects, but it does let you actually kind of get a larger sampling, right? So one thing, what I mean by that is like, one thing that when you're doing with internal play testers is they get really good at the game, right? Everyone in there, they've played the game for just a ton. They've all played different versions of the game. They played it when it was a lot harder than it is now. So the nature of their feedback is going to just be qualitatively different than when I like put it up to the masses, and you're going to get a wider range of player experience. And that's one of the reasons that game developers always try to get people who haven't played their game to test things and see it. So like one thing that I guess I forgot to mention was during our development process, we would also go out to events every now and then, and we would try to get people who hadn't played our game before to sit down and play it, and we would just like watch them like hawks and try to look at how they were interfacing with the UI and every detail. In fact, I remember one Seattle event that we went to specifically where we were specifically just watching to see that they knew to click and turn when their turn was up, because we had done some UI things there to try to make it more obvious, and like we specifically wanted to watch that was working, or if we needed to improve that flow. So it's also valuable to just like watch your players play if you can, right? And that's where one of the things we're being out in early access is that I could watch streamers play our game and just learn a lot that way. But and so that's very useful, because basically like at any point, if I want to watch somebody play my game, I can just load up Twitch and see it, right? So that's useful. And I recommend developers should basically always do that. I mean, that's pretty common. But yeah, so it just makes it easier, wider range of stuff. And actually, way at the beginning, when I said that we learned a lot of lessons in that very first game that we made, that was one of the lessons that we learned, because we mainly just tested it with ourselves and then with a couple of close friends, and that was it. And then our game was just like ridiculously too hard for people, and as a result, it kind of flopped. Now it was just this little flash game, and we were pretty young, so I wouldn't. but that was like one of the lessons that we learned from that. So
you'd say that all of these previous games definitely taught you more about game design.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, like you can read a lot about game design, and I do, I read like game design blogs and all kinds of writing on it and stuff. But the best thing you can do to learn about games is just to get your feet dirty. Like, it's like with any skill, you have to practice it, you have to work at it, you have to think about it. But and then also you have to like analyze it afterwards. So it's important to go back and then put your critical lens on and be like, okay, what went wrong here? What went right? What can I learn and try to take away from this? And that's like the mindset to really improve at anything. But in game design, it's no different. So.
And also about the feedback stuff you said, you mentioned it in a previous interview that there was this thing where you'd realize that you'd notice one person's pattern of feedback, so sometimes you'd focus more attention on it or not. Do you want to talk more about it?
Oh, yeah. So I mean, you do start to notice things. So, um, you might recognize names of people, and there's not too much more on that, but just that, yeah, you can say, you can kind of remember like, okay, this player particularly dislikes this kind of thing. So when you see it like crop up in suggestions a lot, it gives you like a framework for understanding why they're saying that. Or you might you can know like, okay, this person always puts in really bad recommendations into here, and that doesn't mean you should ignore it. You should still read it and then like think about it. But you just kind of pick up patterns like that.
And I'd say the difference between the feedback from experienced player versus from a new player, you already talked about this a bit, but it's not that you should ignore the newer players because sometimes it's good to understand how they're interacting with the user interface, like you said. So both feedbacks are good, but
Yeah, if anything, the new players' feedback is mostly more useful. Really experienced players' feedback is more useful for balancing because if they've played 1,000 hours, they probably have a better understanding of like what a good card is versus a bad card. But even then, that's more useful for like high level balance. But a new player is going to be able to actually more often tell me like, oh, actually this thing here is unintuitive, or this wording here doesn't make sense. Because like maybe the experienced player, just when they see a card, like when they see, I don't think there's anything wrong with the wording of this card, but if they see like corruption, they don't like need to read corruption when they see it again, right? They just see corruption and immediately like map what it does in their mind and know to play it or not, right? So new players are much more useful learning new novel things, I think.
are there any more questions from anyone? Remember, you can always answer anything you feel is related to this and you'd like to answer as well.
Sure. So let's see. Slime Massive asks like what metrics we collect. I mean, we collect a lot. We collect pretty much whenever the player makes like a relevant choice. We collect it. We collect all kinds of different balancing metrics. We don't display any of it anywhere, but maybe we will at some point in the future. However, it's just a good thing in general to like collect as much as you can, and then I think figure out like questions that think about the kind of questions you would ask, and then make sure that you have the metrics to answer those questions. And then I don't have like a favorite kind of data structure or object pattern necessarily, but I'm pretty utilitarian about it. Oh, here we go. Pogo Stick says, was it a hobby or a project? Yeah, I mean, it was definitely like that was our full time job, for like 2.5 years. What we had done for sales was we had created, we had sat down and we had done some math. So it's like, okay, here's how much we need to sell to be able to keep doing this, into like after Slay the Spire, or to be able to just keep going as indies. Like we need to sell this number. here's how much we need to do to like actually equal our old salaries. Like, here's our number that we expect to estimate for a conservative estimate. Here's our here's us being pessimistic. Here's like our optimistic number. And we created some, you need to sit down and do some basic math, right? It's like basic business planning. We obviously never expected to do as well as we have done. And what we did is we looked at Steam Spy was more useful at the time too. We looked at Steam Spy. We looked at a bunch of different games, both successful and unsuccessful, and we tried to like create a good, reasonable idea of what we would do. But at the best, you're kind of doing estimates. So and you have to be kind of pessimistic when you're doing that. You can't just like look at a successful title and be like, yeah, we're gonna sell like as much as Nuclear Throne or whatever, and we're gonna like be rich and make all this money. We tried to like you have to like come to it and kind of be as realistic as possible. So yeah.
I have one from someone, which is, what is your biggest design regret currently in the game, if you have any?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, definitely. You always have things that with more time or money you would have changed, or, with more knowledge in the future, you could like go back and change it. I can think of two. One is, I wish that we had never made endless mode. And that is because originally when we had put endless in our roadmap, we actually then conceived of Ascension, and we were like, this is so much cooler. And then we made Ascension, but then people were like, because they had different titles, people still expected us to make an endless mode. And we thought, oh shoot, we have to make something called endless now. We don't think it's going to be a particularly good way to play the game now that we've like thought about it a lot. But, okay, we'll do it. And I just think some people do like it, but it's definitely, at the same time, like some people get into like a long endless run and it kind of like drains the fun out of it, and I really don't like that. And then the other thing is, I wish that we could make all of our events, or because like some of them are really good, but I would want all of our events to like totally not have dice rolls in it, if that makes sense. So like sometimes you'll be like, oh, there's a 30% of this happening. We try to reduce that over time. Of course, the famous one is the Gremlin wheel, which I know people love. But it would always be better if there was more choices and things like that. So and at some point it's just kind of funny to leave Gremlin wheel in at its current state. But it's just like a thing where just time and resources. So it would be cool if we had more depth in our event system in general. Basically.
So in the end, you can use these concepts that even if they're failures, you can learn from them, and that applies to a lot of things, not just game design.
Yeah.
Alright, I have another question I think is good to ask. So, Slay the Spire is very mod-friendly, while many other games are not. What was the thought process behind designing the game to be mod-friendly? Or did the general code architecture just work out to be mod-friendly by itself, and allowing modability was just tacked on as an easy afterthought?
So, the or there is kind of false, so I'll explain why. So, STS is very mod-friendly, and the thought process is simply that I like it when games allow modding. It's stupid when they don't. So I always wanted to support modability. That was like, we're like, oh, maybe after early access we'll go in and we'll like make a good API or something for mods, and we'll allow it because that would be really cool. I think it'd be great if people can make their own characters, their own cards. Like, this is the kind of game, especially where custom content can be really cool. So right from the beginning, it's like, we want mods eventually. And then kind of just as a byproduct of being a Java game, people were able to, they figured out how to do modding on their own. And then it's like, okay, well, I guess we'll just run with it. And, and then, kind of just by as a byproduct of being a Java game, people were able to, they figured out how to do modding on their own. And then it's like, okay, well, I guess we'll just run with it. And, then it's like, okay, well, I guess we'll just run with it. And, then it's like, okay, well, I guess we'll just run with it. And, then it's like, okay, well, I guess we'll just run with it. And, then it's like, okay, well, I guess we'll just run with it. And, then it's like, okay, well, I guess we'll just run with it. And, then it's like, okay, well, I guess we'll just run with it. And, then it's like, okay, well, I guess we'll just run with it. And, then it's like, okay, well, I guess we'll just run with it. And, then it's like, okay, well, I guess we'll just run with it. And, then it's like, okay, well, I guess we'll just run with it. And, then it's like, okay, well, I guess we'll just run with it. And, then it's like, okay, well, I guess we'll just run with it. And, then it's like, okay, well, I guess we'll just run with it. And, then it's like we'll just help these people out and make, since they've already got it figured out, we'll just run with what they're doing, and that'll give them a ton of power. And yeah, that's what we did. So it was, we had an intent that would have lined up for it, but our intent ended up just it just worked out, and so we were like, okay, cool. And that's why the modability is the way it is. Does that make sense? Hopefully.
Yes, it's like they were
Okay,
doing
cool.
their own work, and I remember the modding channel used to be something called like unsupported modding.
Yeah, and that was the joke. We made a channel. We called it unsupported modding, and then when we did go back later and make the improvements to make it supported, then we changed it. Um, but the intent was always there. So um, so I guess Slime Massive 31, which by the way, all these Slime Massives. Uh, What are your feelings on leading a new and popular game genre into the gaming scene with the pending Steam Award nomination for innovative gameplay? I think it's pretty cool. It's actually really interesting to see like a host of Slay the Spire clones. Uh, it's neat. Like Slay the Spire is the kind of game that I want to play, so I like to see other people emulating that. I think Casey said this too, and I agree. What I don't like is when people like just take literally our UI like exactly, and then they like take our numbers and just like reskin it and put it like I think that's really shitty. That's not cool. What is cool is when people like take a lot of the core concepts for doing like Ratropolis or something, and they put like a twist on it, and they make a new interesting title. Like I think that's really good. I want to see people take the core aspects of it and do something cool with it, and not just do an exact rehash. So, and also because I think ultimately people are successful, you don't just do a rehash, right? Like you actually hamper your ceiling by just rehashing a game. Like if you want to put twists on it, you want something different. That's what allows you to break through and stand out.
You said that Slay the Spire was inspired by some other games, and
Oh, it's
what?
so many games, like a ton of different games, like even little things. So like our relic system is inspired by Binding of Isaac. Or our map system comes right from FTL. We have tons of deck builder inspirations. So there's not like just one inspiration. There's a bunch, and I in a bunch of different interviews I've talked about them in the past. But yeah, or like even Spelunky was a big influence. So um, follow up question: are there any frustrations with support mods? Um, Not really. I mean, it can be annoying to like have to dance around not breaking people's mods sometimes, but I think overall it's clearly worth it. And I think the modding has been really really loved, and it's been popular, so I don't have regrets. So
I think it's good for the longevity of the game as well.
yeah, exactly, and it's not some cool stuff. I mean, or even things like the googly eyes mod.
Like sometimes you just need something dumb.
Yeah, and also even if I was trying to think of it not from a, like what's fun and good perspective, it's like those mods, like a lot of mods have then gone on to get articles written about them in like PC Gamer or whatever. It's like that all builds into the feedback loop of like making the game more popular and more loved by people. So it's just a good thing. All right. Um
We are nearing an hour, and so we can just end this unless you see anything else that you'd like to answer.
uh
We probably have time for one more question.
all right, let's find the best question here. what were the community's best and worst influences on the game's development? I don't know. I won't answer that one, but it's funny to think about. Let's see. What's a good one? Have we ever floated the idea of a game? Maybe. Uh, we'll see. I don't know what our next game will be, so, or maybe we'll make a sequel. At some point. I don't want to pigeonhole us into what our next title will be. Like I said, we're gonna create some ideas and go from there. Or maybe we'll come back to a sequel, like after another game, and then a sequel later or something. So it's definitely a possibility.
Well, that was a quick question. Maybe we have time for one more. Oh no, they're making electric boogaloo jokes. Maybe I have my own, and it should be
Sure, let's
good.
end it with one of yours.
What would you recommend for game developers who are in school? Like, what would you want them to do so that they can create their own good games?
Work on a game while you're in school. It's what Casey and I did. I really recommend it. And then while you're playing games, try to think about them critically. So if you play a game a lot, right? Maybe after you play it, try to think, okay, why do I like this game? Maybe can you think and like write down the things that you like about it, or like why you think it's compelling. And actually, especially if you really like a game, try to see, okay, what are things I don't like about this game? What can be improved about it? And if you can, to be a good game designer, you need to be able to like take that mindset and do it to like every game you play. Because if you're not able to be critical and think about things, then like just being somebody who plays games isn't enough. You have to actually have rigorous thought processes that allow you to get to the good stuff. So that's what I'll say.
Well, I think that's enough questions. I enjoyed interviewing you, Anthony, with how it's like to be a game developer and what it's like to design games. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun. Hope this was useful for you guys. So,
Goodbye.
all right, cheers, everyone.